Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Marilyn Sprick today, and she's going to do an overview for us of the First Step Next program from Pacific Northwest Publishing. Marilyn, I'm going to let you take it away.
Great. Many thanks for your time in advance. In this next 45 minutes or so, I'll be taking you through the second edition of a Tier 2 intervention for young children with challenging behaviors. I know your time is valuable, so we'll try to paint a picture up front so you can determine whether this is an intervention that you'd like to explore in your district, school, or classroom. So first thing we're going to do is look a little bit at what is First Step Next, a little bit of background. First Step Next is a second edition of a behavioral intervention for students with highly challenging behaviors, young children. First Step, the original version of the program, has been out since 1997. It's perhaps one of the best, most highly researched, evidence-based behavioral intervention for young children who have difficulties. So as we move forward, what I'd like to do is characterize the types of behaviors that are exhibited by students who are candidates for First Step Next. When I think of this intervention and the potential it has, I think of young children that I worked with who crossed my path, those lovable, memorable, and exhausting children. I think of my Rickies, Keiths, Michaels, and Angelas. So as we go through this list of the types of behaviors that this intervention targets, you might want to do some thinking about the children that you are seeking help for. So first of all, kids who are great First Step Next candidates are students who tantrum. Ricky, one of the children that I used to work with, was like a little volcano. He was dormant and happy at times, but then suddenly erupting, screaming, yelling, kicking. I'm sure those of you that are working with young children have seen that before. It's the amount and the excessiveness of it that we're looking at. These are children who also may be physically aggressive. So what follows Ricky's tantrums was often shoving, pushing, hitting anyone who might be in his path, and that included other children as well as adults. They might be children who damage other people's properties. So one of the things that I remember about Ricky is his mom was called to school very early on in the school year. I think it was after an episode where he was chasing other kids around the classroom with scissors. But his mom had to walk to school because Ricky had put sawdust in her gas tank. So these are children who often not only are physically aggressive but damage property. They may suddenly cry or display inappropriate affection. They often ignore teachers' warnings or reprimands. So you might hear, "You can't catch me," as they're running around the room causing havoc. These are children who may make lewd or obscene gestures. And unfortunately, these are also kids who are often teased and neglected or avoided by peers simply because other children are sometimes afraid of them and not sure what they're going to do. If you have children who exhibit these types of behaviors, you may wish to consider staying tuned with us to see if this intervention might serve the children that you are concerned about today. A little bit about the authoring team. I had the great privilege of working with some wonderful colleagues who have deep, deep experience with this program. The first of our authoring team was our leader and esteemed colleague, Dr. Hill Walker. He's probably the premier researcher of our time. Dr. Walker began developing First Step and researching the first edition of the program some 20 years ago and has been instrumental in our field to help understand the importance of early intervention for students with behavioral difficulties. Dr. Walker continued to lead the authoring team for this second edition of the program. Brianna Stiller was one of the original authors of the development team. She is currently director of our local PBIS program in our local school district. Each year, Brianna hires, trains, and supports First Step implementations in her district and has done that across the last decade or more. Dr. Christy Coughlin is a school psychologist, implementer of First Step Next, and writer and director of research with us at Pacific Northwest Publishing. Dr. Anamika Golly is a research scientist at Oregon Research Institute. She is also one of the original authors and a researcher who has provided training and support to research sites across and school districts across the country for the last couple of decades. I'm Marilyn Sprick. I'm a former special ed teacher, general ed teacher, consultant, and curriculum developer. And the last of our colleague and authoring group is Dr. Ed Stiles, who's a research scientist at Oregon Research Institute, and also instrumental in researching and moving First Step into implementations at the preschool level. So with that, we're going to look at our agenda so you know what we're looking at. We're going to be looking at the whys of First Step Next, the what's, the process, and the outcomes. First Step Next is a highly robust intervention that does require time, and so we always want to make sure that you understand the whys and what's in the process of programs that you might be choosing to implement in your schools. So moving forward, we're going to look at the incidence and the number of children that we're looking at with behavioral difficulties in preschool and early childhood settings. A survey of more than 3,500 kindergarten teachers showed that in the year 2000, teachers were estimating 16% of students entering kindergarten to be experiencing a difficult or very difficult entry. So what we're looking at is, in the past, we may have maybe one student in a classroom with those really highly challenging behaviors, and now we're looking at sometimes 2 or 3 and sometimes even more who are experiencing difficulty in the school setting. We wanted to look a little bit at poverty as a contextual variable because we think that may be one of the things that's impacting the number of children that we're seeing that are coming to school with challenges that we then need to work on helping the children learn how to be successful in the school setting. Some of the family and social risks that are related to poverty include job loss, poor quality child care that goes along with lack of resources, inadequate supervision, unaddressed mental health issues, and unsafe neighborhoods. Needless to say, those things all negatively impact parenting practices, and with our poverty as a variable in now more than 50% of children in our public schools, we're looking at the importance of early intervention growing as opposed to receding. Okay, what are the consequences for learning with children with highly disruptive behaviors? 17 to 21% of our teachers report having lost 3 to 4 hours per week of instructional time to disruptions. And an additional 19% of teachers report having lost 1 to 2 hours per week of instructional time to disruptions. So as we look at First Step Next, a major concern and consideration to think about is, are we going to put time in up front with children with behavioral challenges, or are we going to go through an entire school career where we have the consequences for learning be disruption not only in the learning of the child with the behavioral difficulty, but also to the peers that are in those classrooms. So again, we're looking at, do we want to spend time now or do we want to spend time later? Early intervention is certainly one of the strongest predictors of more serious and delinquent behaviors. So we see conduct problems in early childhood leading to problems later on, not surprising. We also find there's great hope, though, in high-quality intervention delivered at the beginning of school careers and sustained across well-managed classrooms. What we find is that those high-quality interventions sustained in well-managed classrooms provide the strongest protections against negative outcomes, such as behavioral episodes at school, ongoing and through the school years, academic underachievement, heavy drinking, adolescent pregnancy, and violent delinquent acts as the students become older. So clearly, we in the authoring team are convinced that our efforts early on are well worth a long-term prognosis of much better outcomes as our kids move through the school years. So let's take a look at high-quality intervention. First Step evidence-based has been reviewed by multiple organizations since its first publication in 1997. Organizations that have listed First Step Next as an evidence-based early intervention include the American Psychological Association, What Works Clearinghouse, the Canadian Registry of Effective Mental Health Interventions, the National Council of Special Education, Crime Solutions Program of the National Institute of Justice, and several other agencies who have looked at the strong research base under First Step. This second edition builds on that evidence base as we move forward and looks at bringing to you a second edition that we hope is as practitioner-friendly as possible so that the fidelity of implementation of this very strongly research-based program can be put in place in your school. So we're looking at what is the process of First Step Next. It is a heavy-duty partnership. We're finding that these young children with highly challenging behaviors, that it truly takes a village at some level to change that behavior and move forward with a successful school career. So we have a First Step Next coach who's generally a school psychologist, a behavior specialist, or a counselor, someone who is well-trained in behavioral supports and is free from the regular daily teaching duties of the classroom teacher. We also look at a First Step Next coach who is typically a well-trained assistant, can be a retired teacher or college student, and the implementation time for the behavioral coach is usually about 10 days of time and about 1 hour per day, and then we look at ongoing maintenance support following that. We will cover that as we move towards the end of this 45 minutes with you. We're also looking at the classroom teacher who joins in that partnership with the First Step Next coach. The implementation from the classroom teacher is about 23 days of time, and it involves classroom celebrations that also involve about 5 minutes per day for those first 23 days of implementation. The classroom teacher implements as a part of her regular teaching duties, but moves into the coaching position as the First Step Next coach actually moves out of the picture gradually. And then we also involve the parent or family member, caregiver. We're looking at about 30 days of active implementation that requires about 5 to 10 minutes per day, and it involves actually congratulating the child and coaching and reviewing lessons that we've taught at school. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the time involved. Okay, looking at the next slide, we're going to look at what are the foundational concepts for the First Step program. The first concept that we work with is the notion that behavior should and can be taught. So what we're going to do is we are going to model and teach replacement behaviors for children who come to school without appropriate classroom behaviors. We're going to look at how do we pre-correct and prompt correct behaviors, then how do we practice and reinforce appropriate behaviors in the classroom, and then how do we review and reteach those skills both in the classroom and at home. So an example of that is we're going to teach our young volatile children that mistakes are okay. So we're going to teach them, tell yourself that's okay when you make a mistake. I can fix that, fix it, or ask for help. And then once we've taught behaviors, we're going to look at the major concept that attention reinforces behavior. So we're going to take two basic key concepts for First Step Next children, and we're going to look at maximizing attention for appropriate behavior and minimizing attention for inappropriate behavior. Our target students are students who are fueled, whose behavior is fueled by attention, so those particular concepts are going to be critical as we turn behaviors around. The First Step Next concepts, components are first, a skill lesson. They involve one-on-one skill lessons with a behavioral coach, and then the student is going to actually learn and practice those skills with the First Step Next coach. We also have the second component that runs concurrently, where we have class sessions where the student goes into the classroom and gets ongoing feedback about his or her behavior in the classroom. They're going to earn points for using their behavioral skills appropriately, and then there's going to be the class celebrations that take about 5 minutes each day, where peers are letting the student know, we congratulate you for your efforts and we are going to give you attention. And then we're looking at that home connection component, where a daily home note goes home to let the family know how the class session went. And then we look at home and school connection activities that review and reinforce the new skills at home. All of these components are programmed and specified so that they can be clearly followed by the coach, the classroom teacher, and then the parent or caregiver at home. Okay, the materials that we're looking at are a First Step Next materials for the coach. We wanted to provide everything that a coach might need. So they're going to receive a manual, a training DVD, because we know that fidelity is extremely important in helping interventions to work. We have a student records folder that includes everything that the coach needs to work with the family already run off and with the student, so that time doesn't need to be spent figuring out what materials are needed. We're also going to look at super student skill lessons and a super student skill book where lessons are actually pre-programmed and taught by the coach. We have a green and red card that lets the student know when he's doing well, and cooperation and reward motivation systems worked in. For the classroom teacher, we have a workbook format that's a manual that reviews the important skills and schedules that need to be followed for fidelity to occur. We have skill review charts, and we also have the reinforcement system. Then for the family, we have a workbook that includes a checklist so that the family can know each day those important things that are important for reviewing and reinforcing appropriate classroom behavior. We have some fun coloring book materials and skill cards for the family. Okay, the implementation process is going to involve screening and eligibility, then a pre-implementation phase, a coach phase, a teacher phase, and a maintenance phase. And what we're going to do is walk you through each part of the implementation process so that you can see how this might actually work in your school. The screening and eligibility process involves determining whether the student is at moderate or high risk or extreme behavior and risk. And the authors have provided the aggressive behavior scale, which is actually norm referenced. So you can determine, as you're looking at the children that we're working with, whether their behaviors are severe enough to warrant an intervention that is as robust and intensive as First Step Next. We're also going to look at, is the student noncompliant, impulsive, and disruptive? And if we have a yes to both of those processes, then we're going to look at, is the student gaining peer or adult attention as a primary motivator? If we have a yes to that, then we're looking at, is the teacher willing to work with a coach? One of the things that we're going to be looking at is changing student behavior by changing adult behavior. And so we have to have all parties agreeing together to work on the First Step Next process, because as Becky mentioned, it is a collaborative process with the adults who are working with the child. And then we want to look at, were 2 or more of 7 behavioral skills rated as needing improvement or a cause for concern? If we have a yes on all 4 of those criteria, then we have a student who is eligible for First Step Next. If we have 3 of 4 criteria that are met, then we're going to use some professional judgment in determining whether we have a student who is eligible for this program. Again, we're talking about putting time up front so that there is less time involved later on in a student who is disruptive throughout the school day and throughout the his school career. And so looking at those criteria will guide you in your decision about who First Step is appropriate for. Okay, moving forward, we're going to also look at a pre-implementation phase. And so going into pre-implementation, we're going to look at building a homeschool partnership. So once the staff members, the teacher and the coach, have determined through classroom observations, the aggressive behavior scale, and so on, that First Step Next would be a highly appropriate intervention, then we're going to invite the parent or caregiver in to take a look at First Step Next as a potential intervention. We have an agenda-driven meeting for the First Step coach and teacher and parent, and the reason for that is so often with children with behavioral problems, we see that a partnership is not the approach taken, but rather an intervention that's imposed on the family. What we want to do is work on a collaboration, and so we've set up an agenda that helps alleviate defensiveness and the sense that this is not a joint process with the parent, but rather something that we're going to engage in together. So the agenda actually takes the parent through what the process of First Step Next is going to look like. We also provided video training for that homeschool partnership so that before you go into the parent meeting with the teacher, we can look at ways to engage the parent as a partner in this intervention. So we also provided, in addition to the actual agenda, we provided some tools for building that partnership. One of the things that we provided is what we call the parent rating of student skills. The teacher has also filled out in advance of the meeting a very, very similar rating of student skills. So we're going to ask the teacher, you know, as we're looking at the possibility of implementing this program called First Step Next, we want to find out exactly how your child does with some skills at home. That also translates to how the child is going to do at school. So we're going to ask things like, with a skill like following direction, does your child follow directions right away and without delay? Can he complete each step of that direction? So, for example, if you ask your child to go to bed, is he going to do that right away and without delay? And then we're going to ask the parent, does that happen sometimes, usually, or rarely? And by asking a question that engages the parent in things that they also are working on at home, you'll hear a parent say things like, oh, boy, going to bed and things like that, that's tough. And so I will ask Ricky probably 5 or 6 times if to go to bed, and you know, I just rarely see him following through with those directions. It usually turns into a tussle. We have tantrums, and it takes me 20 to 30 minutes to get him to bed. So we're also going to look at things like, does your child ask for attention the right way? Does he know the difference between the wrong and right time to get adult attention? So, for example, if your child wants your attention and you're on the phone, does he wait till you're at the phone? Usually, sometimes, or rarely. And again, by asking questions of a parent, we get them to engage in looking at behaviors that are important both at home and at school. And then what we have the teacher do is interject and discuss with the parent so that we can look at, do we have shared concerns, or are we seeing some things that are similar or different at school? So sometimes we hear things like, well, he does really well at asking for attention the right way at home, but not at school. And so we can look at also capitalizing on things that are strengths in one setting but not the other. Okay, so once we get that implementation process going, we've looked at screening and eligibility. Then what we're going to look at is the coaching phase. And the coach phase lasts for 1 to 7 days and includes, as we mentioned earlier, the teaching of super student skill lessons. And we're going to look at then also class sessions in the classroom where we're going to look at reinforcing the skills that we've taught in those coaching lessons. So the student skills that we're going to be teaching in these little 5 to 10 minute one-to-one lessons with a child are following directions, how to be safe, how to ask for attention the right way, how to be a team player or cooperate with others, how to do your best, how to be cool or manage anger, and learning that mistakes are okay. What we chose were 7 behavioral skills that we felt would be the strongest skills for helping translate to broader skills such as be respectful, be cooperative, and be safe. The skill lessons, we also included behavioral training for with the videos. The coach is actually going to get an outline of how to teach the skills and then lightly scripted lessons that they can read in advance to visualize what the lessons are going to go like with the student. They take about 10 minutes per day, and all the support pieces are there. So again, the video training allows the coach to preview in advance how those lessons might go. The support pieces that we provided are a little almost read-aloud type book where the teacher actually teaches the lesson and then gives a little vignette. When the teacher gives the attention signal, Franklin Fox says, "I freeze." And then we have the teacher say, "What does Franklin Fox say when the teacher gives the attention signal?" And the child can respond, "I freeze." And then Franklin Fox says, "I listen to the teacher." So we can say, "And what do you do?" "Oh, I listen to the teacher." And then Franklin Fox says, "I do what the teacher asks right away." And so there's a picture of Franklin Fox putting away his blocks. And so if Franklin Fox says, "I do what the teacher asks right away," we can ask the child, "And what do you do when the teacher asks for you to put your materials away?" So there's multiple opportunities in the materials for the kids and the teacher to actually practice the skills given. So there's the read aloud, and then we do role plays with the child as we move through the skills that we're trying to operationalize. So in the skill lesson that you can see the little boy there has gone through a lesson about following directions. The teacher is role-playing, am I following directions by putting my toy away? And what you can see, the little boy is actually, our first step student is practicing being the teacher and showing the teacher the red card because she didn't follow directions. And then he gets to tell her how she can improve her behavior. So very strong, nice skill lessons built into the program. Okay, then we also have class sessions, and the class sessions are where we're going to take the skills into the classroom, and the student is going to get continuous feedback with the little green card, red card that you see there. And what the coach is going to do is sit right next to the student. It's something that the teacher can't do because she's got 20 other little kids in front of her, or 25 as it may be. And the coach is going to show the child the green card when he's using appropriate behavior, and nonverbal feedback with a red card when he needs to change what he or she is doing. That continuous feedback is going to be accompanied by verbal praise and points. And we actually have a research-based schedule where the feedback and points are gradually faded over time, and over time during the actual class session and across the program days of the program. And then we have the daily connections note that will go home so that when the class session is finished, the coach is going to draw a happy face if the student has done the appropriate behaviors in the classroom and received the points that he or she needs. We're also on that class connection note going to let the parent know whether we're working on following directions or following directions and be safe, and so on. Okay, then we also provided for your training, actual video training for the coaches so they could see what happens in the classroom. As you can see, the coach here is giving a thumbs up because our first step next student is demonstrating appropriate behavior in the classroom. Those class sessions start out with 20 minutes per day, and then they gradually increase to 50 minutes per day across those first few days of the program. And then we're going to see that each day, not only do we have the coach cheering the student along, the teacher cheering the student along, the parent cheering the student along, but each day we have peer celebrations when the student has demonstrated appropriate behavior for first that 20-minute lesson, and then the next day for a slightly longer session up to 60 minutes in the classroom with a peer coach by the student. So then once we finish the coach phase in the program, then we're going to move to a teacher phase. So there's a gradual fading of the coach being right next to the student and then moving his or her feedback gradually further and further away from the student, and then gradually transitioning the red card, green card coaching phase to the classroom teacher herself. And so if you look at the next slide, we're going to see the class sessions where we have the teacher phase. So in the teacher phase, we have an 8 to 10 day transition phase where the coach is actually going to work for about an hour in the classroom with the teacher. And then we're going to gradually transition the red card, green card game to the teacher for the next 11 to 30 days. So here you see the classroom teacher, and now we've got the red card, green card, providing the child with feedback on his appropriate behavior. The red card, green card is hanging around the teacher's neck in this instance. What we're finding is that different classroom teachers like that green and red card to be either around her neck or on a little clipboard so that she can have hands-free for her instruction with the entire class while she's still giving feedback to the student. We're also finding that different teachers like to give the points in different ways to the student. We have the points being awarded at various intervals, and so this teacher had a vibrating timer in her pocket and point markers in her other pocket so that when the interval timer went off, she's going to actually move one point marker to the positive pocket on the other side so that by the end of her class session, she can have the points all accumulated in that pocket. So you can see that we're going to transition the student from 60-minute feedback sessions to full-day sessions so that eventually the student is experiencing that high-intensity feedback across the day for longer and longer intervals so that eventually his day looks like a normal school day with the same kind of feedback that most students are receiving through the school day. So then we're going to look at the home connections part of the program. And so we're looking at, during this coaching phase or teacher phase, we're looking at continued ongoing regular home-school communication between the home. We look at the daily connections note. We also look at daily check-ins with the teacher. And we're going to look at ongoing meetings with the coach and teacher. Everything is all scheduled out. And so whether it's homeschool connection materials or teacher materials or coach materials, we have a very clear schedule of events that take place or activities for all parties involved. So the daily activities are going to include that daily check-in, check-in phone calls, and then daily activities include the regular daily connections note, positive parent-child interactions, and then the super student skill review that goes on. Okay, now because the home connection is such an important part of this program, we are also going to do video training with the parent so that they can see what it looks like to do high fives and small celebrations with the child. And so we're also looking at building some very nice quiet moments with the parent. And so not only do we have high fives and celebrations when the child takes home that daily note that says, I've met my goal requirements, but we're also going to structure activities that reinforce and reteach. So we structured little games and check-off lists for the parent, and so the lessons that were taught at school with the coach actually go home in a coloring book format, reworded for how to use the skill at home. So this one is ask for attention the right way at home, and we're going to have the parent read to the child. Ask yourself, is the right time for attention? If yes, quietly say the person's name. That would be me, Mom. Say, I need your attention, and then wait patiently. And then there's a little comic book vignette so that we can walk through what it looks like to ask if it's the right time to get attention, how to ask for attention politely, and then how to wait patiently while the parent is completing whatever task he or she is involved in so that he or she can turn attention to the child and give it as requested. So nice, quiet moments and activities that reinforce and reteach the lessons that we've taught at home, at school, at home. So moving through the coach phase to the teacher phase to the maintenance phase, we're now going to look at a relatively brief, we've looked at a relatively brief intervention for very, very challenging behaviors. And so as we look at maintenance, we're going to look at some follow-up activities that will effect long-term change for these highly challenging children. So for 30 days, we have this intensive intervention with coach, teacher, and parent, and then teacher and parent with coach's support. And what we recognize is that 30 days in the lifetime of this child is a very short amount of time. So we want to look at follow-up activities for this first year of implementation with First Step Next to preserve and continue and foster those behavioral gains for the remainder of the school year. Then for year 2, we also want to look at sustaining behavioral gains into the next school year. So we're going to look at flexible maintenance planning. We're going to look at booster sessions. We're going to look at how to graduate to daily connections notes that are less intensive. We're going to look at a skill review schedule. We're going to look at ongoing and periodic coach visits. And we're going to look at periodic class-wide green and red card games for the entire class. So we're looking at maintenance as a very important phase. The implementation timeline looks as follows. We have pre-implementation that runs day 1. We have an implementation phase that runs from days 1 to 7, then 8 to 10, and then days 11 to 30. And then we have that maintenance phase that we just spoke briefly of. These are each of the parts and roles and responsibilities for the coach, for the teacher, and the parent. So again, kind of as review, the coach phase is in the classroom for days 1 through 7. And then the teacher phase includes 2 days of transition with the coach in the classroom, and then days 11 to 30 with the teacher running it, and then day 31 plus for periodic booster sessions through the school year, and then some maintenance and review in the next school year. So we're looking at an intervention that can serve this child's career of success as they move through the school year and into the succeeding school years. So again, the time is up front or the time is later on, and we're feeling that this early intervention is certainly worth the time to effect long-term change for these students. The consistency that we're looking at is, do we have everybody on board? So that consistency of effort is what we believe makes part of the success of First Step Next. So we have behavior taught by the coach, we have behavior reinforced in the classroom by the coach, teacher, and peers, and finally we have behavior reinforced at home. So the next concept I want to discuss a little bit is we have a job well done, but a job not yet done. We have a long-term prognosis that is certainly brighter and a future of hope for these children who are starting out with a rough school entry. Now, a little bit about the job well done, but not quite yet done. The evidence base for First Step is robust, and we've got studies that run for the first edition across the last 20 years. We have single subject designs with experimental and quasi-experimental designs, and we have 20 years of research that shows us that we get a decrease in problem behaviors and an increase in adaptive behaviors. So again, this robust evidence base. We also have a diverse student population. We have students with ADHD, ASD, and students from various racial and ethnic backgrounds. Again, multiple studies that guide whether this program is going to work with children from all walks of life, as long as they are children who fit that initial profile that we looked at. We also have this evidence base that has guided our revisions. And so with research being conducted on the original First Step program across multiple years, we had wonderful research to guide our revisions. And so we looked at some research that basically said that in order to affect long-term effect, we need additional efforts above and beyond the original First Step to maintain those program effects. So that's what guided our integration of maintenance, the maintenance phase for the new First Step Next program. We also saw researchers calling for ways to increase teacher usability and program sustainability. So having Brianna Stiller, who's implemented First Step in her school district for over 20 years, Anamika Golly, who's worked with school districts across the nation and in Canada with First Step implementations, and Ed File, who's worked with preschool programs. We had a wonderful set of practitioners and researchers who were able to guide our development of First Step Next, so that all of the things that were a little bit vague in the First Step program are now provided in extremely user-friendly, practitioner-friendly materials that provide really everything you need in order to implement the program with fidelity. We also looked at some researchers calling for increased monitoring of fidelity of implementation because we know that the adults are so very, very important in changing the behavior of the children. And so we also included implementation fidelity checklists that supervisors of the program could use to implement First Step Next. And then we also wanted our practitioners to consider the classroom context. We certainly had researchers that were discussing the importance of the context of the classroom in which First Step Next, or First Step was implemented, that impacted the results of this intervention in the various classrooms. So the nature of the classroom context is one of the last things that I want to discuss with you. We have some research that looked at, is the nature of a classroom orderly or chaotic in the early years of a child's school career? And if so, how does that impact children who are aggressive? And so these would certainly include those children who would be appropriate for a First Step Next adoption. So Kellum in 1994 conducted a study of aggressive first grade boys and then followed them up 7 years later in middle school. And what they found is aggressive first grade students who were assigned to chaotic first grade classroom had the odds of 59 to 1 in favor of being aggressive still in the middle school years. So that's kind of that notion that we were talking about. Let's either put time in early on, or we have ongoing time being put on into these children as they move through developing more and more aggressive behavior as they move through the school years. They also looked at equally aggressive first grade boys who had been assigned to well-managed first grade classrooms, and they found that by being in the well-managed first grade classrooms, the odds were only 3 to 1 in favor of still being aggressive in the middle school years. So that speaks highly to the importance of not only having a really solid research-based intervention for our children who enter school with challenging behaviors, but also having a solid classroom context within which to implement that intervention. So with First Step Next, we also included reproducible masters in the program for a classroom context assessment. We put it actually in the teacher's materials so that they could do a self-assessment, knowing that some coaches of the First Step Next students were not in the position to actually coach the teacher herself in her classroom management. So we asked the teachers to do a classroom context self-assessment. If that assessment indicates that there are many students who have disruptive behaviors or fail to follow directions, fail to follow an attention signal, for example, then what we're going to do is, via that self-assessment, ask the teacher, would you like assistance in managing the classroom? And then what we did was we provided on reproducible masters classroom expectation lessons that were designed by Golly that teach the really, really basic classroom skills of pay attention to signal, walk in the classroom, stay in your personal space, and use indoor and outdoor voices. Those classroom lessons are provided so that the classroom teacher actually has red and green card lessons that can be taught to the entire classroom. And of course, if the classroom teacher is asking for assistance, then the classroom coach might also be asked to go in and support those efforts. Other recommended resources are Chance by Marilyn Sprick that would go beyond those basic classroom lessons to additional support pieces for really developing that strong classroom context, not only for your at-risk students, but also for the entire classroom context itself. And then classroom coaching and management, which is a resource that might be used by classroom coaches. So I'd like to close with just this little note for you that our contact information is Pacific Northwest Publishing. We're hoping that First Step Next is an intervention that might provide you and your colleagues with some hope for these little young ones that are challenging not only for their teachers, their families, for their peers, but are also presenting behaviors that could present them with a school career that does not provide as much optimism and hope as we want all children to have as they enter their school careers. So if you have questions, our contact information is Pacific Northwest Publishing. If you have questions that weren't addressed during this webinar, you can reach us through our contact information on our website at pacificpublish.com. We, as authors, are more than happy to answer questions that you might have. I'd like to close with that notion that the webinar is recorded. The PowerPoint handouts will be available via that recorded webinar. We have an archive of the webinars on our website along with the PowerPoint handouts. We are finding that this is a highly effective intervention that involves that the First Step Next coach, who might be a behavior specialist or counselor. Those colleagues often supervise people like retired teachers, volunteers that are willing to put time in as retired teachers. We sometimes have college students who are earning credit for becoming first-time coaches, and we sometimes hire instructional assistants to fill the role as a supervised classroom coach. So if you have any questions about those roles and responsibilities, please feel free to contact us. We're more than happy to answer those questions via our website and our email address that you can ask questions with. Let's see. We also have the First Step Next materials on our PNW website. So if you're interested in actually looking at the materials themselves, you can look at the Look Inside materials to do that. So I'd like to close my time with you today. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.
Thanks, Marilyn. We appreciate you taking the time to overview this program for everyone, and we'll get this up on our website shortly.